Hello YouTube, in today's video I have a little photography tip for you. Now if you've had a whole lot of experience with cameras, you will probably already know this because this is quite the beginner tip. However, if you are new like me and still in the experimenting stage, maybe this little tip will do you some good. Either way, I hope today's video will be educational. So yeah, let us jump right in. It is the 1st of October 2012, Monday. You are watching 0612 TV. This is 0612 TV.
Welcome aboard.
So on the 23rd of September 2012, I actually went out to the Botanic Gardens to take some photos. As you would probably have expected from the name, most of these photos are actually plant related, and that is when I discovered this little trick, I guess. Now, I said I discovered it, but I'm pretty sure I didn't invent it. I'm sure someone else has thought of this a long time ago, so I'm not actually claiming credit. But hopefully I can actually break this down in a way that you can understand and apply it. So let's jump right in. When I was doing photography in the Botanic Gardens, the sun was extremely bright. I was getting perfect exposure for all my shots, and that is of course a cause for celebration. However, think about this. In a number of situations, I actually wanted to take a photo of a particular plant. It's normally a flower, sometimes it's a leaf. But the problem is, when I actually try to take that photo, and the Botanic Gardens are basically just filled with greenery of all kinds. What happens is that when you take the photo, the background competes with the foreground too much. Of course, when you're taking photographs of a subject, what you would want to do optimally is to actually isolate the foreground from the background so that it is clear what you're looking at and the background doesn't actually sort of grab the viewer's attention. You might say, well, use a shallow depth of field then. And that is indeed a method. Of course, for shallow depth of field photos, you'll be able to see that the foreground, which is of course the subject you want to draw attention to, being in clear focus. Whereas of course whatever's in the background is going to get blurred and creamy, so that it doesn't fight for the attention. This does indeed work most of the time. However, when I was doing my shoots in the Botanic Gardens, I realized that due to the color of everything, despite the fact that the background is indeed kinda blurred, it still competes for attention thanks to its bright striking colors. In a situation like this, you'll probably want to bring out the foreground a little bit more, and the way you do that is by actually creating a variation in brightness. Imagine if I could make my foreground subject brighter than the background. That would be a great way to actually draw attention to the foreground. Of course, as mentioned, we are under bright sunlight, so it's not that easy, but this is a trick that I actually found out that seems to be quite useful. First, crush your exposure. If you're shooting manual, go ahead and tweak the aperture or the shutter speed to get quite a drastically underexposed image. Of course, if you're shooting auto, use exposure compensation instead. Now here's what you do. Pop up your flash. Because everything is actually underexposed, you can then add light selectively to bring whatever you want, that is of course your subject, back into a good exposure to of course sort of highlight it and separate it from the background. Of course, there needs to be some amount of physical separation between your foreground and the background so that when you actually press that shutter button, the flashlight lights your subject, and since it's fallen off somewhat, it will light the background less, and that creates the exact contrast we want. We are then able to light the foreground and make it pop, whilst the background becomes dark and interferes less with the foreground. In fact, take a look at a few photographs in which I've used this method for. So let's have a little bit of a before and after comparison. Look at this. Before, the background is actually so bright and colorful, and it sort of causes the foreground to actually merge with it, and you can't really tell what I'm trying to take a photo of. However, using the method I just described, I'd light the foreground and darken the background, thus being able to actually highlight the plant in front. So take a look at a few more examples and you'll be able to see how useful this technique is. Of course, this is mostly applicable only when there's bright sunlight lighting everything up. In a slightly darker place, it might be trickier to get your light to hit only the foreground and not the background to create the contrast. And of course, like I mentioned, there needs to be enough physical separation between the foreground and the background. But yeah, that's basically all I have for you today. I hope it's an interesting little tip that, well, can make something of. So yeah, that concludes this little tutorial slash tip. I think I'll call this a tip more than a tutorial. But anyway, if you have any comments, queries or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Don't forget that I appreciate every like, favorite and subscription you give me. But until next time, you are watching 0612 TV.